little over 2,000 years, the Jewish holiday of Hanukkah has been celebrated among global Jewry as a reminder of Jewish zeal and resolve for the defense of the faith known as Judaism. In this presentation, we shall revisit the popular narrative, examining the Hanukkah story, casting the light of truth upon the official account by revisiting the details left to us by the historians of Jewish antiquity. To accomplish this journey back in time, I will lean on a collection of books contained in the writings of the Apocrypha, meaning hidden writings, where we shall find within its volumes of the books 1st and 2nd Maccabees to discern what is indeed truth, history, myth, or if the case exists, lies. To set the backdrop and do justice to the magnitude of the events surrounding the holiday of Hanukkah, I feel it necessary to transport the viewer further back in time than just 143 BC and the occupation of Jerusalem by the Seleucid Empire, but rather to another time when a much more powerful empire that oppressed, ruled over, and subjugated the people of Israel for decades, that being the Babylonian Empire. Circa the 6th century BC, under the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, the southern kingdom of Israel was sacked by the invading forces of the Babylonian army, under the command of the then ruthless king. Under his command, his officers took 10,000 of the strongest and most noble of the city of Yerushalayim, leaving behind only the weak and the feeble. 2 Kings 24:17. One of the nobilities of Yehuda was a young boy by the name of Daniel, believed to be a prince among the Yahudians, and his compatriots Hananiah, Azariah, and Mishael. The same Daniel would go on to become both a statesman and a prophet. Daniel's prophecies would contain some of the longest running and most significant prophecies in history, all found within the volume of the Tanakh known as the Bible. Daniel chapter 8 and 5 mentions how a male goat would charge with color, power, speed, and force against a ram. This goat would be Alexander the Great and his Macedonian army, moving with force and smashing the Medo-Persian forces of Darius the Great. He would find Alexander's forces far too formidable to stop from eventually overcoming his entire empire. The Greek general, Alexander the Great, was one of history's greatest globalists. He captured what was known to the Western historians as much of the then known world in the late part of the 4th century BC. Alexander would unify and conform his kingdom in the Greek culture and language. The Hellenization of the world would begin. This would have a very long-term impact on all surrounding countries, and not least of all, Israel, its people, and its culture. His reign was short-lived, as Alexander died at the tender age of 33, and his kingdom was then divided among his 4 leading generals in 313 BC. 2 of the resulting dynasties were known as the Ptolemaic, headquartered in Alexandria, Egypt, and Seleucid, headquartered in Antioch, Syria. Israel was located between these 2 rival kingdoms. Many of the Jewish people of Israel had become Hellenized in their thinking and practices because of this 150-year rule by the Greeks. Daniel chapter 8 and verse 9 mentions another key biblical figure that will arise as an anti-type to the anti-Messiah, meaning he shall be a forerunner, if you will, of the Antichrist, bearing many similarities to the one appointed to come near the end of the age. This is the generally agreed upon understanding of most scholars. Out of one of them came a little horn, which grew extremely big in the directions of the south and east, and in the direction of the glory. It grew so great that it reached the army of heaven. It hurled some of the army and the stars to the ground and trampled on them. Yes, it even considered itself as great as the prince of the army. The regular burnt offering was taken away from him, and the place of his sanctuary was thrown down. Through sin, the army was put in its power, along with the regular burnt offering. It flung truth on the ground as it acted and prospered. Then I heard a Holy One speaking, and another Holy One said to the speaker, "How long will the events of the vision last?" This vision concerning the regular offering and the transgression, which is so appalling that allows the sanctuary and the army to be trampled underfoot. The first said to me, 2,300 evenings and mornings, after which the sanctuary will be restored to its rightful state. Daniel 8, verses 9 to 14. In 175 BCE, Antiochus Epiphanes IV ascended the throne of the Seleucid Empire, at which point he now controlled Judea. Wanting to outdo his father and subdue Egypt, uniting the Seleucid and Ptolemaic kingdoms into one superpower, he moved with choler against the mighty power in the south. However, to fund these humongous war efforts, Antiochus would need vast sums of money, and a lot of it, when a faction of Judean priests surreptitiously offered to pay him to replace the high priest Onias III with his younger brother Jason. He accepted their invitation, but their blood money would come at the cost of great treachery. Numerous contenders to the position of high priest like Shimon the Benjamite, all with treacherous intention, a man who, after being vexed to the point of betraying his countrymen, namely Onias III, the reverend, the pious high priest, Simon would solicit the aid of Antiochus and his generals by advising them of the existence of a vast and immeasurable wealth being stored in the Jewish temple. This proved an irresistible temptation to the Mad King, for that was the nickname of Antiochus. To further investigate this wealth that would no doubt secure future war campaigns in and around the region, thus paying for much needed mercenaries and vessels of war, Antiochus accepted, but with a view to plunder this massive treasure trove. But one Simon of the tribe of Benjamin, who was made governor of the temple, fell out with the high priest about disorder in the city. And when he could not overcome Onias, he gat him to Apollonius, the son of Thrasius, who then was governor of Seleucia and Phoenice, and told him that the treasury in Jerusalem was full of infinite sums of money, so that the multitude of their riches, which did not pertain to the account of the sacrifices, was innumerable, and that it was possible to bring all into the king's hands. Now, when Apollonius came to the king, and had showed him of the money whereof he was told, the king chose out Heliodorus, his treasurer, and sent him with a commandment to bring him the foresaid money. So forthwith Heliodorus took his journey under a color of visiting the cities of Seleucia and Phoenice, but indeed to fulfill the king's purpose. And when he was come to Jerusalem, and had been courteously received of the high priest of the city, he told him what intelligence was given of the money, and declared wherefore he came, and asked if these things were so indeed. Then the high priest told him that there was such money laid up for the relief of widows and fatherless children, and that some of it belonged to Hyrcanus, son of Tobias, a man of great dignity, and not as that wicked Simon had misinformed. the sum whereof in all was 400 talents of silver and 200 of gold, and that it was altogether impossible that such wrongs should be done unto them that had committed it to the holiness of the place, and to the majesty and inviolable sanctity of the temple, honored over all the world. But Heliodorus, because of the king's commandment given him, said that in any wise it must be brought into the king's treasury. 2 Maccabees chapter 3 verses 4 through 13. This initial attempt to seize the wealth of the temple would however fail, but later Antiochus would eventually seize the temple and all its treasuries, seizing both temple, its inner sanctums, all the holy vessels, and the 7-branched menorah, the golden altar of incense, showbread stand, precious utensils, everything but the Ark of the Testament. Even the veils and the vials were seized. Pouring vessels, censers, and all this was followed by a very great massacre. But this created a dangerous precedent. 3 years later, another rich priest, Menelaus, offered even more money and was appointed high priest over the temple by Antiochus Epiphanes IV. Jason, the previous high priest, would go into exile. Menelaus himself was not actually from the line of the high priests, and his appointment upset the conservative Judeans. Worse yet, he took treasures from the temple to pay Antiochus, which was sacrilege. However, the crowning machination of all his misdemeanors was Menelaus was a radical Hellenizer, turning the Hebrews away from the faith of their fathers and the laws of Yahuwah handed down by his servant Moses. This in turn would bring the curses of the Torah upon the people of Israel. His appointment, not being popular, meant his position was enforced by the power of the crown. Meanwhile, in Antioch, that being his headquarters, Antiochus decided it was time to make history. He led his army a second time against the famed land of Egypt to secure victory as at the last, in hopes of achieving what his father had not. Daniel chapter 11 verse 24. Upon rumors of his death in battle, civil war erupted among the Jews in Jerusalem as Jason reappeared from exile and led a popular revolt against Menelaus. However, rumors of Antiochus' death would prove slightly exaggerated. He had been humiliated by the Romans and forced out of Egypt. Yet while retreating, he heard of the struggle in Jerusalem and reinstated Menelaus. Antiochus was a known adept and devout occultist, and in order to know what time to inflict the worst possible affliction upon the nation of Israel, he sought the dark arts of divination, as he was oft known to do, in order to divine the date for his offensive against the people of Israel. He would decide it to be the winter solstice high point, a date most attractive to him for several reasons. The feast of Saturnalia, which he embraced, was approaching in the winter solstice, which it honors. The birthday of Mithra also occasioned on the 25th of December, which in that year aligned with the 25th of Kislev, as it still frequently does in the Gregorian calendar. The celebrations of Sol Invictus, an ode to the unconquerable invincible sun or sun god, that being Mithra. His name, Antiochus, from birth was actually Mithridates. He was a devotee to Mithra from the day of his birth. The name Antiochus Epiphanes means God manifest, or the visible God. But his people called him Eponymenies, which means madman. Once back in power, Menelaus led a campaign of terror and continued the Hellenization of the land of Judea. a statue of the Greek god Zeus, known to the Romans as Jupiter, was placed in the Holy of Holies, among other violations of Jewish law. Many pious Jews resisted Menelaus' measures, some by martyrdom, others by escaping into the wilderness, and still others by active and open revolt. As though to add insult to injury, Antiochus wrote decrees to his entire kingdom, which would usher in the formation of a universal one-world religion. 1 Maccabees chapter 1, verse 41 to 63. Moreover, King Antiochus wrote to his whole kingdom that all should be one people, and everyone should leave his laws. So all the heathen agreed, according to the commandment of the king. Yea, many also of the Israelites consented to his religion, and sacrificed unto idols, and profaned the Shabbat. For the king had sent letters by messengers unto Jerusalem and the cities of Yehudah, that they should follow the strange laws of the land, and forbid burnt offerings, and sacrifice and drink offerings in the temple, and that they should profane the Shabbats and festival days, and pollute the sanctuary and holy people, set up altars and groves and chapels of idols, and sacrifice swine's flesh and unclean beasts, that they should also leave their children uncircumcised, and make their souls abominable with all manner of uncleanness and profanation, to the end they might forget the law, and change all the ordinances. And whosoever would not do according to the commandment of the king, he said he should die. In the selfsame manner wrote he to his whole kingdom, and appointed overseers over all the people, commanding the cities of Yehudah to sacrifice city by city. Then many of the people were gathered unto them, to wit, everyone that forsook the law, and so they committed evils in the land, and drove the Israelites into secret places, even wheresoever they could flee for secure. Now the 15th day of the month Caslu, also known as Kislev, in the 140th and 5th year, they set up the abomination of desolation upon the altar, and builded idol altars throughout the cities of Yehudah on every side, and burnt incense at the doors of their houses and in the streets. And when they had rent in pieces the books of the law, which they found, they burned them with fire. And whosoever was found with any the book of the testament, or if any committed to the law, the king's commandment was that they should put him to death. Thus did they by their authority unto the Israelites every month, to as many as were found in the cities. Now the 25th day of the month they did sacrifice upon the idol altar, which was upon the altar of God, at which time, according to the commandment, they put to death certain women that had caused their children to be circumcised, and they hanged the infants about their necks, and rifled through their houses, and slew them that had circumcised them. Howbeit many in Israel were fully resolved and confirmed in themselves not to eat any unclean thing, wherefore the rather to die, that they might not be defiled with meats, and that they might not profane the holy covenant. So then they died, and there was very great wrath upon Israel. 1 Maccabees chapter 1, verse 41 to 63. Antiochus' goal achieved, the feasts of the Hebrews were all outlawed, from Pesach to Sukkot. Even the Shabbat was stopped. Having no temple altar with which to offer the daily sacrifice mentioned in the Torah and the prophecies of Daniel. Antiochus, having used divination to find the most efficacious time to deprive the Hebrews of their customs and laws, and direct his own worship in line with the then known festival of Saturnalia, which culminated in the winter solstice high day, choosing the 25th of Kislev, which that year was in the winter, to honor the god of the Greeks and Romans, Zeus and Jupiter, by having their image set up in the temple and desecrating all things holy. Daniel 11, verse 32 to 35. Those who act wickedly against the covenant, he will corrupt with his blandishments, but the people who know their God will stand firm and prevail. Those among the people who have discernment will cause the rest of the people to understand what is happening. Nevertheless, for a while they will fall victim to sword, fire, exile, and pillage. When they stumble, they will receive a little help, although many who join them will be insincere. Even some of those with discernment will stumble, so that some of them will be refined, purified, and cleansed, for an end yet to come at the designated time. Daniel 11, verse 32 to 35. In the face of an ever-growing shadow of the empire, with traitors to the Jewish way of life in every position of power, one name, one man, one family rose to prominence and would forever change the course of Israelite history. They would become the stuff of legend. Most prominent of these rebels was the group led by Mattathias of Moedin, a descendant of the priesthood, holding direct connection to Phinehas of the line of Aaron. It was Mattathias who would resist the command to bow down at an altar to pay homage to new gods, Antiochus' vision of a one-world religion, now law, was propagated across the Seleucid Empire. Mattathias, upon seeing a fellow countryman sacrifice at the new altar, flew into a rage and slew the man, and too the warden who had bidden them to show obeisance to the throne. After dispensing with them, he would lead his family of 5 sons into the hill country of the wilderness, where they would gather others to form a resistance and plan their guerrilla warfare against the Seleucid forces and all sympathizers. Mattathias kindled hope in the Jewish people by coming to the aid of the widows and orphans and helping the oppressed in Judea by restoring the Torah, circumcising the newborns, tearing down altars erected to the new state religion, and removing the proud men. All who fled persecution joined him, and even the brethren of the Hasmoneans joined his band, greatly strengthening their numbers as well as their resolve. Mattathias and his 5 sons, of whom Judas Maccabeus, also known as the Hammer, who upon his father's deathbed was appointed to be the captain of the resistance to the evil empire looming to destroy the hope and light of Israel. It is unto this Judas Maccabeus that we now cast our focus. Yehuda, or Judas, as he is commonly referred to, would rally the last hope and faithful of Israel in the defense of the faith and the nation. Judas and his band of rebels, though continually outnumbered with odds as high as 6-1, rather than to face their enemies in direct head-on campaigns, chose rather to outwit their opponents and utilize a shock and awe strategy similar to today's modern warfare approach, utilizing what is termed as guerrilla warfare tactics that would prove tremendously successful against the Hellenized Jews. This gave the Jewish people great victories to restore morale and hope, while further frustrating the Seleucid forces with increased insecurity about their ability to retain power and control in that region. Menelaus, in response, summoned the Greek armies from the neighboring Seleucid provinces. One such incursion was led by Commander Apollonius, the Syrian general, governor of Samaria. At the Battle of Nahal el-Haramiyah, or known as Wadi Haramiyah, Judas defeated a small Seleucid force under the command of Apollonius, who was himself killed. Judas took possession of Apollonius' sword and used it until his own death as a symbol of vengeance. After Nahal el-Hanamiah, recruits flocked to the Jewish cause. There is a deep irony here concerning the acquisition of the sword. Even though Judas was fighting against Syro-Ptolemaic control, it was in fact a sword devoted unto the greatest pagan deity, Apollo, that he used to secure all his victories for the land of Israel until his own death. Hanukkah means dedication, or more correctly, rededication. But what many people may not be aware of is there existed a feast of dedication recorded in the Bible and the Apocrypha prior to the events to be followed on the 25th of Kislev. In the reign of King Solomon, upon completing the construction of the house of Yahuwah, its altar and courts, Solomon and all Israel dedicated it all to Yahuwah. 1 Chronicles 5:1. It occurred precisely on the eve of the Feast of Tabernacles, also known as Sukkot. 1 Chronicles 5:3. It was to be a feast for all nations, hence its appellations, Feast of the Nations. 1 Chronicles chapter 6, verse 32 to 33. And Festival of Lights. The dedication was approved and accepted by Yahuwah. 1 Chronicles chapter 7, verses 1 through to 3 and verse 12. Yahuwah decreed the Feast of Tabernacles is to last for 7 days, plus an additional 8th day, with the last day known as Shmini Atzeret, an 8th day of solemn assembly. Leviticus chapter 23, verse 36, and 1 Chronicles chapter 7, verse 9 through 10. During the Feast of Tabernacles, also known as Sukkot, there was a great ceremony called the Illumination of the Temple, which involved the ritual lighting of 4 golden oil-fed lamps in the court of women. These lamps were huge menorahs or candelabras, 75 feet high, lighted in the temple at night to remind the people of the pillar of fire that had guided Israel in their wilderness journey. All night long, the light shone their brilliance, it is said, illuminating the entire city. In celebration and anticipation, the holiest of Israel's men danced and sang psalms of joy and praise before Yahuwah. This festival was a reminder that Yahuwah had promised to send a light, the light, to a sin-darkened world. Yahuwah promised to send the Messiah to renew Israel's glory, release them from bondage, and restore their joy. Imagine that you are in ancient Jerusalem during the Feast of Tabernacles. Visualize seeing these massive menorahs giving a tremendous amount of light. This sheds new light to the words of Messiah Yeshua when he announced in the temple courtyard, "I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light which gives light." John 8:12, Revelations 21, verse 22 to 27. 1 Maccabees chapter 4, verse 41 to 59. Then Judas appointed certain men to fight against those that were in the fortress, until he had cleansed the sanctuary. So he chose priests of blameless conversation, such as had pleasure in the law, who cleansed the sanctuary, and bare out the defiled stones into an unclean place. And when as they consulted what to do with the altar of burnt offerings, which was profaned, they thought it best to pull it down, lest it should be a reproach to them, because the heathen had defiled it. Wherefore they pulled it down, and laid up the stones in the mountain of the temple in a convenient place, until there should come a prophet to show what should be done with them. They made also new holy vessels, and into the temple they brought the candlestick, and the altar of burnt offerings, and of incense, and the table. And upon the altar they burned incense, and the lamps that were upon the candlestick they lighted, that they might give light in the temple. Furthermore, they set the loaves upon the table, and spread out the veils, and finished all the works which they had begun to make. Now, on the 25th day of the 9th month, which is called the month Caslu, or Kislev, in the 148th year, they rose up betimes in the morning. Verse 56. So they celebrated the dedication of the altar for 8 days, and joyfully offered burnt offerings. They offered a sacrifice of well-being and a thanksgiving offering. Verse 59. Then Judas and his brothers and all the assembly of Israel determined that every year at that season the days of dedication of the altar should be observed with joy and gladness for 8 days, beginning with the 25th day of the month of Kislev. 1 Maccabees chapter 4, verse 21 to 52, and verses 56 and 59. The Hasmoneans, for their part, were aware of the goodwill borne to them by most, but not all, Egyptian Jews. They sought to strengthen the ties between the two communities in many ways. For example, by inviting the Egyptian Jews to join them in the celebration of the newly established feast of Hanukkah, to commemorate the consecration of the temple by Judas Maccabeus in December 164 BC. A twofold attempt was made to attain this goal, as attested by the preface to the second book of Maccabees, couched in the form of a letter from the Hebrews in Israel to their Egyptian brethren. To the brothers, the Jews of Egypt, greeting. May the Lord shower you with his blessings, and may he remember his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, his faithful servants. May he confer on you all a heart to adore him, and to do his will generously and instinctively. May he open your hearts to his law and his precepts, and may he cause peace to prevail. May he answer your prayers, reconcile himself with you, and not abandon you in times of need. This is the prayer that we address to him here and at this time, under the reign of Demetrius, the year 169. We, the Jews, we wrote to you. Quote, in the distress and the crisis that fell upon us in those years, since Jason and his partisans defected from the Holy Land and from the kingdom, they went as far as to set fire to the great gate of the temple and to shed innocent blood. Then we prayed to the Lord. Our prayers were granted. We offered a sacrifice and the finest flour. We lit the lamps and set out the breads. And now we write you to ask you to celebrate the feast of the tabernacles of the month of Kislev in the year 168, which would accord with the year 144 and 143 BCE. 2 Maccabees chapter 1 verses 1 through 9. The Demetrius here alluded to is Demetrius II, the Seleucid king who reigned from 145 to 138 BCE, then from 129 to 125. The date of the first message cited in the letter, 169, of the Seleucid era, corresponds to 143 and 142 BCE. By the same reckoning, the date of the letter itself would be 124 BCE. The Jews of Jerusalem and Judea stand for the Jewish ruler and high priest, John Hyrcanus, son of Simon the Hasmonean, the second son of Mattathias. The reference to the Feast of Tabernacles, Sukkot, which occurs during the month of Tishri, which is September to October. I would ask a viewer to duly note several points about this narrative, which begs serious question and deeper investigation. Firstly, no prophet was available to dispatch the word of Yahuwah so as to advise Judas and what he should do concerning this matter. Concerning his war efforts, the record states he was most diligent to fast and pray before engaging the enemy, and oftentimes miraculous signs and wonders occurred. However, in regards to the cleansing of the temple that took place 3 years after the abomination of desolation was set up in the Kodesh Kedoshim, Holy of Holies, he did not seek to inquire of Yahuwah as King David had, nor did he seek the Levites to inquire, but instead removed the stones and left them in a convenient place should a prophet turn up to advise him on what to do concerning this great matter. This, dear friends, is of no small import, for the scriptures are abundantly clear regarding the pattern of the tabernacle and all things pertaining to it. Moses and Aaron are to ensure they do not alter nor deviate from the pattern set before them. This came with a very stark warning from the throne room of heaven itself. You are to make a menorah of pure gold. It is to be made of hammered work. Its base, shaft, cups, ring of outer leaves, and petals are to be of one piece with it. It is to have 6 branches extending from its sides, 3 branches of the menorah on one side of it, and 3 on the other. On one branch are to be 3 cups shaped like almond blossoms, each with a ring of outer leaves and petals. Likewise, on the opposite branch, 3 cups shaped like almond blossoms, each with a ring of outer leaves and petals. And similarly, for all 6 branches extending from the menorah, on the central shaft of the menorah are to be 4 cups shaped like almond blossoms, each with its ring of outer leaves and petals. Where each pair of branches joins the central shaft is to be a ring of outer leaves of one piece with the pair of branches. Thus, for all 6 branches, the rings of outer leaves and their branches are to be of one piece with the shaft. Thus, the whole menorah is to be a single piece of hammered work made of pure gold. Make 7 lamps for the menorah and mount them so as to give light to the space in front of it. Its tongs and trays are to be of pure gold. The menorah and its utensils are to be made of 66 pounds of pure gold. See that you make them according to the design being shown you on the mountain. Exodus 25, verses 31 to 40. Secondly, the book of Maccabees supplies us with revelatory and shocking information that it was Judas Maccabee's idea to move the observation of the greatest feast in Israel, that being the Festival of Tabernacles, also known as the Feast of Dedication, or the Festival of Lights, or the Festival of the Nations, for that year from the 7th month Tishri to the 9th month Kislev, so as to rejoice in that time that was predetermined by Antiochus IV for a celebration in honor of Mithra's birthday, the 25th of Kislev, and the ancient celebration associated with him called the Feast of Saturnalia. So any decision to rededicate the altar and transfer the Feast of Sukkot from the 7th month Tishri to the 9th month Kislev was not based on any biblical precedents or prophetic utterance from the prophet, but purely of human origin, fueled by self-aggrandizement to memorialize his victories over the enemies of Israel at the cost of the commandment of Yahuwah to the very priesthood he is descended from. Our immediate question here is to seek a biblical precedent for any change of a feast date, and under what conditions is that change then permissible by Yahuwah. 1 Kings 6 and verse 1, Numbers chapter 9 verses 1 through 14, 2 Chronicles chapter 30 verses 1 through 21. Yahuwah in his wisdom made provision for exceptional circumstances that would affect an Israelite's ability to begin the biblical year. In the spring, as determined in the Torah, albeit for one reason or another, in other words, through uncleanness, through death of a relative, or some other unforeseen circumstance that prevented the individual from attending the Passover in the first month. The original calendar timeline, however, is not to be altered. In other words, the Feast of Shavuot, also known as Pentecost, is still to be kept on the 50th day after a Passover Shabbat of the first month, and not 50 days from the second Passover date. Now, some will inevitably argue that Judas, being descended of the Levitical priesthood through the lineage of Joab, 1 Chronicles 27:7, is entitled to institute or create this 8-day celebration or feast and decree them as a permanent regulation for all Israel and for all time, to indeed commemorate his amazing victories. After all, it's for a good cause, and it isn't actually causing any harm, is it? The problem with that notion is he called it the Feast of Tabernacles and the Feast of Dedication in the 9th month. Both names pertain to the feast held in the 7th month, which Yahuwah himself decreed as holy and to be kept at a specific time and none other. Please see Leviticus 23, Deuteronomy chapter 4 verse 2, and Matthew chapter 5 verse 18. In comparison to all the wars Israel have fought since their departure from Egypt as a nation, this by no means was Israel's largest and most costly or memorable victory. The book of Joshua records some of Israel's most momentous wars, not to mention the victories of Gideon, King Saul, King David. The book of Esther records a genocidal plan crossing continents, impacting tens of millions of Hebrew families, spanning the entire Medo-Persian Empire. The books of 1st and 2nd Chronicles all record wars including hundreds of thousands, if not millions of Israelites. Judas Maccabeus and his cohort numbered around 5,000 to 6,000 men, opposing the Seleucid army of about 20,000 men at the height of their conflagrations. In 1 Maccabees chapter 4 verse 58 to 59, it is recorded, Mattatiah's family and the congregation of Israel ordained that the days of their reclaiming the altar should now be kept as a celebration from year to year, from the 25th of Kislev for 8 days, with mirth and gladness. They also dedicated another day to be kept yearly, the 13th of Adar, in remembrance of the defeat of Nicanor and his head and hands being removed and hung towards the gates of Jerusalem. This is potentially connected to the naming of one of the gates in Jerusalem, hence the name of one of its gates, the Nicanor Gate. The 13th to the 15th of Adar are more generally held as the 3 days of fasting for the nation of Israel after Haman's decree was passed to annihilate the Hebrews. Esther chapter 4 verse 15. The winter solstice occurs on December 25th. It is the time when in the northern hemisphere the days are shorter and the nights are longest. But from this moment the day begins to grow, and Deus Natalis Solis Invicti, the birthday of the unconquered sun, is celebrated with mirth and gladness, hence the 12 days of Christmas or winter solstice celebrations. That invincible sun is a reference to the deity known as Mithra, whose worship and devotion competed with early Christianity, with which it was certain that similarities existed. It is of noteworthy mention that Mithra and Tammuz, the reborn Nimrod, are one and the same individuals from different mythologies originating from Ethiopia. It may come as a surprise to some to learn the story of the oil lasting a miraculous 8 days does not come from the book that is the source of all knowledge concerning the celebration of Hanukkah, that being the book of Maccabees. The story of the cruse of oil that was discovered and miraculously burned for 8 days, long enough for more oil to be made, in actual fact is pure fiction and did not actually happen. I myself bought into the story and was in awe of the event until I found that increasingly more and more academic Jewish scholars have refuted the account as not actually being an historical fact. I wondered, why on earth would Jews reject the account? Then I learned that the academic elite, consisting of many rabbis, were reporting the fact it was a fabricated story of myth rather than the stuff of legend. Here is why. The Gemara, which is incorporated into the Babylonian Talmud and was compiled approximately 600 years after the events concerned, contains the only single mention of this alleged miracle of the oil, and not the book of the Maccabees. So, the 8-head plus 1 servant stick, Hanukkah, is not the menorah of biblical history. The Hanukkah has no link to ancient Hebrew antiquity, other than a rabbinical creation of a fictitious event that never happened at all. This was actually part of the continued Hellenization that began in the priesthood and continues to this very day. By following the template of Antiochus Epiphanes IV divinations, mimicking Judas is leading the Israelites, albeit very naively, into celebrating the Feast of Saturnalia in the temple, but calling it Festival of Lights, or dedication, or worse, tabernacles, in the 9th month, and ordering it to be kept for 8 days. With the advent of the internet and social media, information is far more readily available. However, it is collectively being controlled, and the masses may not be as aware of how our understanding of history and archaeology is actually being manipulated, and what was once fact is now the stuff of fiction, or worse, erased. The war between priesthoods is still continuing. Just look around you during this season every year and make up your own mind just who's actually winning the war on truth. In 164 BC, Bacchites, in charge of Seleucid forces in Judea, defeated Judas, driving him from Jerusalem. Quickly rebounding from this reverse, Judas took the offensive and, in 160 BC, routed and killed the Syrian general Nicanor at Edessa, close to his earlier victory at Beit Horon. Judas himself was killed in battle by Bacchites at Elasa later that year. Judas's band was no match for that 20,000 strong army. Leadership of the Maccabees passed to Judas's brother, Jonathan, who continued guerrilla campaigns against the Syrians. In 143 BC, Syrian forces, in league with alienated Jews, captured and eventually executed Jonathan at Ptolemais. Subsequently, the Seleucids recognized another of Judas's brothers, as king of Judea, establishing the Hasmonean dynasty, which ended with the ascension of Herod the Great after his marriage to the last Hasmonean queen, Miriam. During the height of his successes, Judas possessed a signed letter from the Roman authorities agreeing not to invade or get involved with Jewish life, which the Romans would prove to violate at a later date, resulting in the destruction of the temple in 70 CE, removing everything that the Maccabees had strove to achieve and rebuild, proving once and for all, when Yahuwah says he is handing his people and their lands over to their enemies, no amount of effort or galvanizing forces will avert the sure word of prophecy spoken in the book of Daniel. The prophecies of Daniel speak of a prince who was yet to come, and he would be the fulfillment of all prophecy, born during Sukkot, not Hanukkah, and his crucifixion would be on Pesach, Passover. His resurrection would be on Yom Bikurim, first fruits, and his return will be on Yom Teruah, Day of Trumpets. Judas was not the Messiah, though he was clearly a deliverer. Antiochus was not the Antichrist, but definitely an Antichrist possessed of Satan. The Roman-Jewish treaty was an agreement made between Judas Maccabeus and the Roman Republic, 1 Maccabees chapter 8, verse 17 to 20, and Josephus. It took place in 161 BCE and was the first recorded contract between the Jewish people and the Romans. The context was, the treaty was signed during the Maccabean revolt against the Greco-Syrian Seleucid kingdom. During this period, Rome's power and influence in the Hellenistic world was growing. Rome had recently humiliated the Seleucid king Antiochus IV by ordering his troops to leave Egypt, and had previously defeated his father Antiochus III in battle. After winning a number of victories and capturing Jerusalem, Judas Maccabeus sent two emissaries, Eupolemus, son of John, son of Archos, and Jason, son of Eleazar, to establish a treaty of friendship with the Roman Senate. This proposal was accepted, and a treaty was signed. In 1 Maccabees, the treaty is preceded by several paragraphs of introduction, which praise the Romans for their great strength and their unique system of government. The clauses of the treaty require each party to aid the other if it is attacked, and to refrain from helping the enemies of the other party. The treaty also contains an assurance by the Romans that they have told the Seleucid king Demetrius I not to attack the Jews. According to 1 Maccabees chapter 8, this is the letter. May all go well with the Romans and with the nation of the Jews, at sea and on land forever, and may sword and enemy be far from them. If war comes first to Rome, or to any of their allies in all their dominion, the nation of the Jews shall act as their allies wholeheartedly, as the occasion may indicate to them. To the enemy that makes war, they shall not give or supply grain, arms, money, or ships, just as Rome has decided, and they shall keep their obligations without receiving any return. In the same way, if war comes first to the nation of the Jews, the Romans shall willingly act as their allies, as the occasion may indicate to them. And to their enemies they shall not be given grain, arms, money, or ships, just as Rome has decided, and they shall keep these obligations and do so without deceit. Thus, on these terms, the Romans make a treaty with the Jewish people. If after these terms are in effect, both parties shall determine to add or delete anything, they shall do so at their discretion, and any addition or deletion that they may make shall be valid. Concerning the wrongs that King Demetrius is doing to them, we have written to him as follows. Why have you made your yoke heavy on our friends and allies, the Jews? If now they appeal again for help against you, we will defend their rights and fight you on sea and on land.
Sevivon sof 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 Hanukkah u'chag tov Hanukkah u'chag tov Sevivon sof 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 Sevivon.
The game of dreidel was inspired by a German game played at Christmas time, which is itself an imitation of an English and Irish one. Our Eastern European game of dreidel, including the letters Nun, Gimel, He, and Shin, is directly based on the German equivalent of the British totem game. N equals nichts, nothing, G equals ganz, meaning all, and H equals halb, which means half, and S equals stel, ein, which means put in. In German, the spinning top was called a torel or tundel. The dreidel, or sevivon, as it is referred to in Hebrew, is synonymous with the holiday of Hanukkah. But why? The traditional folk story told about the dreidel is that it was used to distract the Assyrian Greek authorities. Antiochus IV decreed that, among other things, it was forbidden to study the Torah. The Jews defied the edict and came together to study anyway. As the story goes, they would keep the dreidels with them and take them out to play whenever the Greeks occasioned by them. This is a great story, but most likely not the origin of the dreidel and its connection to Hanukkah. More likely, it was used by children and families in Eastern Europe to occupy themselves as they sat and watched the Hanukkah candles burning. Rabbi David Golinkin shares a little bit about the history of the Sevivon in Noam Sion's A Different Night, the Hanukkah book of celebration. And I quote, "The dreidel game originally had nothing to do with Hanukkah. It has been played by various people in various languages for many centuries. In England and Ireland, there is a game called totem or teotonym, which is especially popular at Christmas time. Our Eastern European game of dreidel is directly based on the German equivalent of the game. In German, the spinning top was called a torel or trundle, and in Yiddish, it is called a dreidel. Interesting how a holiday in which we are highlighting the battle against cultural assimilation is celebrated using a game we culturally appropriated. Notice the word savivon is a Hebrew word, dreidel is a Yiddish word. The two languages, though very similar, are very different. Yiddish has its origins in Germanic. This word savivon means spin, spin, spin. It is a phrase that's repeated over, much like occult spells and occult ceremonies have repetitive words as an incantation, or a spell that evokes a spirit. This is the purpose of the ancient game. It is to evoke what is called tutelary spirits or guardian spirits. I read from an excerpt. A totem is a spirit being, sacred object, or symbol that serves as an emblem of a group of people, such as a family, clan, lineage, or tribe. While the term totem is derived from the North American Ojibwe language, belief in tutelary spirits and deities is not limited to indigenous peoples of the Americas, but common to a number of cultures worldwide. However, The traditional people of those cultures have words for their guardian spirits in their own languages and do not call these spirits or symbols totems. So in other cultures, we find the same thing where they evoke spirits, guardian spirits over peoples or area locale. The Greeks, the Africans, the North Americans, South Americans, and all wide Europe had such tutelary spirits and guardians that they called upon for protection. This is the kind of divination that Antiochus Epiphanes IV practiced, and his father before him. We see many such games coming into the hands of our young children, even to the present day, as it did then many hundreds of years ago in Europe. Such toys as the fidget spinner, which is a strange instrument but has deep occult significance based around the number of 3, 6, and 9. It is actually a 666 worshipping instrument used to evoke spirit or elemental or tutelary spirits. So you'll see here various images which show that this actually has a very darker side to it in being able to evoke those elemental or tutelary spirits I spoke about before. Well, I certainly hope you've enjoyed this presentation. I know I've enjoyed delivering it, and I hope you've enjoyed being enlightened by it as well. As you can see, when we take away from the word of Yahuwah or add to the word of Yah, we create space for Hasatan to be able to come in with his lies and deception. Chavarim, there's so much more great content on the Ahavah Fellowship YouTube channel, so why don't you go over there and check it out. Until next time, Shalom.